Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. It's the dynamic duo back again for your Tuesday morning, afternoon, evening lifestyle choice of listening to this podcast. Brice, you know how we started off. I need to know how you've been doing over the past week, man. How have you been?
You know, it's been good. You know, I can't complain. Really, man, I've just kind of been relaxing a little bit, trying to take the load off, not trying to do too much. You know, just watching the news, keeping up with everything around the world and everything. So, you know, not too much, man. Obviously, you know, excited that the other sport has going on. Basketball has returned, so obviously I've been watching that. And makes me more excited for the eventual attempt that the football sports world is going to attempt when they try to come back in about a month.
Right. Now I'm excited, man. I've been watching some games in the bubble. Have you been watching Matisse Thybulle's uploads to YouTube? He does vlogs every week on the bubble situation. They're probably the most entertaining things that has come out of sports in recent time that are not actual sports, but just seeing what the lifestyle or his lifestyle in the bubble currently is. And I know other players are doing it too, like JaVale and stuff like that.
I haven't necessarily seen it, but I've seen highlights. I've seen a screenshot of it, so I haven't actually tuned in yet. But, I mean, listen, I feel like, hey, it's something you can do. People want to have access to, like, what's going on within a bubble, so I think that's obviously, you know, entertaining to watch. So I might go check it out maybe later tonight or something.
Yeah, man, I encourage it, man. It's some really good content, and I feel like anybody who's a fan of sports and just wants to see what some of these athletes have been going through for the past few months or are about to start going through some similar things, I would check it out. I think it's worth the time, worth the watch. But what we have to start today with is a blockbuster trade that was in the works late. What was it? Saturday evening, Saturday afternoon when the trade went down, I think.
I believe so. I believe it was afternoon.
Yeah, it was Saturday afternoon where Jamal Adams is no longer a New York Jet. The star safety was traded to the Seattle Seahawks along with a a fourth rounder in 2022. And Seattle traded him for exchange for Bradley McDonald, a safety, a first-round pick in 2021, a third-round pick in 2021, and a first-round pick in 2022. This is via Adam Schefter. And, of course, he got his physical done, and the trade seems to be all the way through. Brice, what was your reaction when you first saw the trade? Because I know the GSMC, the Slack was going in. It was probably the most active the Slack has been in a little bit. And I didn't think it would come because Jamal Adams went and got himself out of New York.
Well, you know, I think obviously this is what he wanted. He wanted to leave New York. He felt like he was not going to get paid the money he deserved, nor, you know, what he was like, you know, he wasn't feeling like he was appreciated. He was not a fan of the head coach. He was not a fan of the owner. It just seemed like everything about the Jets situation was not ideal for him. Plus, the Jets, we don't look at them as a team that's going to compete for a championship this year. So, and you also, or the playoffs remotely. And I think that also is just like, you know what, with all that being known, I don't need to sit here and waste many more maybe of my prime or entering my prime on a team that may have no direction when I can go to a team that is ready to win, has a good culture like Seattle does, because Seattle's known for their culture and locker room. Obviously playing with Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson, playing a part of a defense that, is just still getting better. Obviously, we can make the argument if the Seattle Seahawks gave up too much in this trade, because obviously I know people have thought maybe they gave up too much, but this was also move they feel like they needed to make, probably to put them at a point where they were like, okay, now our secondary is pretty much top notch. I feel like they lost Earl Thomas about a year ago, I believe, and now they found his replacement in Jamal Adams. Even though I do look at Jamal Adams more of a Cam Chancellor than Earl Thomas to me, but either way, they got them a top flat safety. And obviously, I don't know if you catched his IG live, but he seemed pretty excited about it as well.
I did not catch his Instagram live. I don't know what did he show on there.
Basically, after the trade, he was dancing on live, so everybody was like, "Oh, he's really happy about it." I think he was cooking and dancing.
Oh wow, social media is such a interesting. Could you imagine? Like, I was talking to my friend about this because we were talking about the exchange that Le'Veon and him had over Twitter, and I found it really funny that you look at stuff that we saw before sports really started to come back. Like, The Last Dance was super big, and I don't think any of the athletes took anything Michael Jordan did. It was just like, yeah, I'm going to keep some things to myself. I'm going to hold it. I'm going to keep it in-house. It may get released a later time where it doesn't affect my money or, is water under the bridge or whatever the case may be. It's not going to be in the documentary. I know that's for sure because it's here right now. And I'm mostly speaking on Le'Veon because Le'Veon was in a situation kind of similar. So if anybody would understand how much of it is just a business, it should be him. But at the same time, Le'Veon didn't get traded. He ended up becoming a free agent and getting his money to the Jets. But from my understanding of what it sounds like Jamal Adams encouraged Le'Veon to go to the Jets. And after being encouraged, Jamal Adams wants to tap out because they can't pay him and thus finds his way out elsewhere. And Le'Veon is probably a little bit salty about that because maybe he wouldn't have been a Jet if Jamal Adams didn't ask him to come there.
Yeah, definitely. And, an underlying thing that we haven't gotten into yet also is how this also affects Jadeveon Clowney when it comes to Jamal Adams being traded to Seattle, because now that means they probably will not go out of their way to re-sign him, even though, again, he was never going to get signed for the money he wanted, just the fact they had money to still give to bring him in. And now that pretty much effectively eliminates him going back to Seattle. But there is some rumors going that the new Jets safety, Bradley McDougald, who was traded from Seattle in the trade, says that Jadeveon Clowney wants the Jets to come and get him. So it'll be interesting to see if the Jets make a move, because I think you just lost a star defender. You probably want to try to get some type of star defender if possible. And maybe, even though it's not an official part of the trade, maybe we can look at that as, the Jets picked up Jadeveon Clowney for Jamal Adams in a way, and then they got another safety on top of it. But, overall, we'll have to see how it goes. Do you feel like Seattle gave up too much to make this happen, or do you think they did what they had to do in this situation?
They did what they had to do. I'm still kind of shocked that a safety went for 2 first-round picks and a third. Like, that's a pretty big ransom. But we got to remember, Jamal Adams is a real difference maker on a team. And if Seattle feels like he's going to be there long-term for the foreseeable future and they're going to lock him into a long-term deal, then I think it's worth the investment, because let's just keep it a buck. Let's keep it 100. Seattle is in a much, much, much deeper and better chance of winning a Super Bowl in the next 2 years 3 years, then the Jets are going to the playoffs in the next 2 and 3 years. The Jets are in a position where they need as many tools to rebuild their team as humanly possible. You know, they still have C.J. Mosley coming back from injury, and we know Sam Darnold can get better, and we know that Le'Veon Bell can be Le'Veon if things work out with that offensive line. But for the most part, their team is pretty desolate across the board in many different areas, and they need a lot of help and a lot of depth in different positions to be able to do anything in the AFC East. And that's just trying to be competitive in the division. We don't even know if they can be competitive outside of the division in their own right, because the NFC is stockpiled with teams on teams on teams on teams. And the AFC, although a bit weaker, it's still got a lot of talent amongst them. So if you can't handle the division, of course, you got to try and get a wild card spot. Now, the Jets are in neither of those positions right now, as far as we know. So we can only say that the Jets needed these picks as much as they did, and they seemed like they weren't budging for anything less. And I assume that other teams weren't going to give that much up, because it's not like Seattle. Seattle's already been past the pivotal point of a team when they're in a Super Bowl run, where their quarterback is young, they're on a younger deal, or they're on a smaller deal because they're young, and they can just stockpile talent across everywhere else because the money's easier to spread around. Russell Wilson has been paid, and kind of paid again. Like, Russell Wilson is here to stay. He's still pretty youthful, and he's in the prime of his career. So at this point, you just have to find a way to supplement that as best as you can, and you got to start doing some cap magic. Like, you have to become a cap magician, like my Saints are. They know how to work around the cap for years, because Drew Brees has been signed to big money for years. So the Saints are not any, they know how to do it. Other teams have been doing it recently, dancing around the giant cap or the lack thereof for their team. So I think Seattle is okay with the potential of having to deal with really, really small amounts of cap space per year, and also realize that you can trade up in the draft, right? That happens. The Saints gave up basically all of their picks to get a third rounder near the back end of the draft, and that was it. They said, you know what, we're done with the draft this year. We got who we need. Because at the end of the day, they don't have that many holes. They don't have that many needs to fill. At the end of the day, they would just be sitting on the bench doing nothing. So I'm not saying that Seattle has the best track record as far as drafting anyway, but the picks were valuable. But they look at it and say, we can still find value in other rounds too, because first round guys don't always guarantee that you're going to have great success with them, right? It's not a guarantee. It's still a gamble. And we've seen success in the second round and the third round. Russell Wilson was what? A third rounder?
Yeah, third round pick.
Right. So going by that logic, you really shouldn't have anything to fear. Now, granted, they gave up a third rounder as well. They did gain a fourth round pick, but I think that we should be able to give, Pete Carroll and their whole organization a bit of the benefit of the doubt that they know what they're doing when it comes to team building, because although the Legion of Boom went and faded after a few years, after of course, the no touchdown from Marshawn Lynch and the interception, they still have been a relevant team within the NFL, and within the NFC, they've made it to multiple playoff appearances. And sure, it's been basically on the shoulders of Russell Wilson and the gang, but relevancy is still here, right? They didn't just, fly into obscurity. And that's what a lot of people think the Rams might end up being on a crash course for, because of their winner take all mentality, when they basically paid everybody, and then they paid their quarterback after failing in the Super Bowl, and then a year afterwards. People are wondering if that team can even coexist or exist within itself. So I think that the trade was fine for both sides. I don't really think there was a winner or a loser on either side. Or should I say there was a loser in the trade? I think both sides won.
Yeah, I mean, listen, they both got what they pretty much wanted. Jets has capital for their future, and See how he hooks up the impact safety that can get on the field for them right away and help them become a better team.
For sure. Yeah, anything last you want to touch on this before we move on to the next segment?
I mean, really, I guess the only thing is, I guess the quick thoughts on the Le'Veon and Jamal Adams, I guess back and forth on Twitter. It's kind of funny because I thought Le'Veon wasn't particularly the happiest there himself, especially with him and the head coach not getting along, and then him seeing a teammate leave, and then he seems like he's against it or that he's not happy about it. It's kind of interesting. I don't really know what's going on between those two and then that dynamic, but I feel like that kind of stood out a little bit.
Yeah, it's well known that Adam Gase doesn't seem to like the superstars that he's had on any team he's been on, but maybe that's just something more to develop later on. Maybe Adam Gase should be on the NFL hot seat, first overall selection right now, next to Dan Quinn and the boys. So we're gonna take. I had to throw that in there, but we're gonna take our first break, and coming back out, we're going to continue on with our NFL conversations here at the GSMC. Stay tuned.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
All right, GSMC Football Nation, we're back here at the GSMC Football Podcast, and you're listening to us gracefully take on more football news and topics of conversation. So, Brice, I got an interesting question to ask for you.
What's up?
Are you preparing to opt out of this podcast?
Ethan, if we had to go to a studio with a bunch of other people, I might have to go ahead and put my opt out there. Like, yeah, I'm just gonna sit it out. Y'all got it. But currently, no, I don't think I'm gonna be opting out as far as I know. Are you gonna opt out? Are you opting out anytime soon, Ethan?
Well, let me tell you something here. For the safety and for the health concerns of my family, I may have to choose. I'm just playing. I'm not opting out. But the NFL has had a breakthrough of the sorts. The NFL was able, or the NFLPA was able to land a victory in a deal to get the season underway and training camp to officially start getting kicked off. And one of those things landed, said kickoff of the season, was the option to opt out if you choose to. And we've got our first set of players who have chosen to opt out by far right now. And first one was Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. Man, I might have just butchered his whole name. But Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. There we go. That's a better attempt. Hopefully I didn't butcher his name, but he's a right starting guard for the Kansas City Chiefs, and he is the first player to opt out of his contract due to COVID-19. He will not play this year and instead will continue to work as an orderly at long-term care facility in Canada, helping fighting COVID-19. So he put out a statement about said choosing not to play in the NFL, and he said, given the worldwide sanitary crisis we are currently experiencing, the NFL and the NFL Players Association have agreed to significant health and safety protocols to protect the players. He tweeted, and there is no doubt in his mind that the Chiefs medical staff will have put together a strong plan to minimize the risk associated with COVID-19, but some risk will still remain. And being at the front line during this offseason has given him a different perspective on this pandemic and the stress it puts on individuals in our healthcare system. And he could not allow himself to potentially transmit the virus in our community simply to play the sport that he loves. And if he is to take risk, he will do it caring for patients. So he is not only walking the walk, but he's also talking the talk, as he's saying that he'd rather risk his time taking care of others rather than playing the sport that he does love to play. Brice, what do you think this means for the NFL, as I assume more players are going to start looking at this opt-out option more seriously?
Like I said, I mean, I think players are definitely going to opt out depending on the situation. And I think honestly, it depends. Obviously, the guy you mentioned from Kansas City, I believe he's the starting guard. Not necessarily a star guard, but a starting guard, a good guard in the NFL. And obviously, I told you before we actually did the podcast that Anthony Thomas also has decided to not play this season. And so this could be a trickle down potentially where multiple players decide not to do it. I think we'll have a pretty good number. Remember, NFL rosters are bigger, so honestly, you could have maybe 2 to 3 players potentially if every team decide not to play, and that would be like 60, 70 players right there. Maybe potentially 90 players if you had 3. May not seem like a big number, but that's still 90 players that are not playing. You don't know what position they are. You don't know how good they are, quality. As far as we know, there are no stars as far as we know right now who are thinking about opting out, which obviously was the big thing when, most leagues come back. Obviously, we know basketball, not necessarily any stars opted out unless it was for injury. We know for MLB, we did have some pretty good quality players opt out there. So it'll be interesting if anybody does it. I think all the main people are going to go. I think it's just a lot of like regular, just good line starting players towards / backups guys might not. Now, obviously, there's other guys in the league who maybe have never had an opportunity or never had the opportunity or is looking to find one. And then somebody opting out could lead to them now having a chance to maybe make a team, get play time, and maybe prove themselves. Even though a pandemic's going on and with the opt-outs, it gives maybe certain guys a chance saying, hey, if he opts out, now it's my turn. Now it's my chance to play. Maybe I can make an impression. Because, that's always the thing about sports. Sports is also a business. You opt out, you could lose your job if the player who comes in for you plays well. You know what I'm saying? So I think since they just started this, because they just made the agreement on everything this past weekend, it's going to start, I think, especially with no preseason games. So you'll basically, for the next month, for me, the next 30 days, you'll start to see people and players deciding to maybe opt out and not come back and play. We just don't know how many. Obviously, I think we need more information because they talk about there are 2 types of opt-outs. There's the voluntary opt-out, that's just you saying, I'm good. And then obviously you have the medical opt-out. Maybe you have a health risk. Maybe family has a health risk. And so that's more of an excused opt-out. I don't know. Well, I think that one you can still get paid, but voluntary, you don't get paid because obviously you're just doing it because you're uncomfortable and everything like that. So I think it's just going to be interesting to see what names come out. And if we do hear of maybe a potentially upper echelon player potentially saying, hey, I'm not comfortable playing this season. I'm going to go ahead and sit it out. I'm going to go ahead and just take a load off for the year and see what happens, And to me, one thing that'll be interesting would also be, can players be able to come back if they opted out early, even though you would think that's unlikely. You never know how sometimes players can be like, I didn't want to do it early. And then I was like, you know what, let me go join my team. Because, you know, I always feel like that maybe could be a possibility. Well, is that in the rules? Can they do that? Or are they, because I know they're going to be put on a list probably before the season starts. So now it's just like, so can they be taken off the list during the season or not? So there's a lot of different possibilities and things that come into this. And so that's where I'm thinking right now since we are still in the beginning stages at this very moment.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about this most is where the NFLPA and the NFL came together on this is the NFL players who choose to opt out this season still will receive some money, so they'll still get paid. And the players who will also earn a paycheck, like as in league-wide, they'll also earn a paycheck, getting the coronavirus spread so widely that they cancel the season before it starts. And the 2020 cap salary will not change. They also agreed that the cap floor for 2021 should be what it is expected to be. So the cap should go no lower than $175 million next year, but it can go higher if revenues come in better than expected. So the NFLPA doesn't want the salary cap to fall because it would mean a smaller pot for the league's revenue going to players, but it also is in the best interest for fans and teams like the Atlanta Falcons for there to be a salary cap floor. Even if the salary cap stays at $198 million next season, the contracts the Falcons have on their books for 2021 already has the team over the cap. So a falling cap would make a tight cap situation worse, and at least it won't drop past $175 million. So good news for you guys again. I did not expect that the Falcons would be in 2 segments today, but once again, you find a way to beat the odds and do the unthinkable. Bravo.
Listen, man. Dave Bear's going to keep chopping on, man. Going to keep chopping on.
Is that a chopper style diss right there?
Actually, I wasn't thinking about that when I said that. But now you say that.
It's okay. I brought it upon myself. Should have kept quiet. I gave you too much credit. But
if that's the case, you need to be getting on the Rams.
Oh, whatever. What do you think is going to be the deciding factor for this in the NFL? Because we're seeing how other major sports leagues have operated. We've seen how the MLS has had basically a pretty good track record ever since they told the other team basically that they can't play, and because they had an outbreak and they shut it down and then they restarted again. And of course, we see how the NBA is doing their practice scrimmages. They got 0 tests, which should be applauded by everyone in the sports world that they were able to pull this off in a bubble system. So clearly that means that it's working for now. And we all know that anything can change tomorrow, even an hour from now. But as far as it is going right now, things are going smoothly in the bubble, as smooth as they can be. And then we look at what's happening in the MLB, where we just see basically a whole game get canceled because it's up to 12 players and 2 coaches now that the Miami Marlins were not able to play because they contracted COVID-19, and thus their teams have been shut down for the game. And I don't know exactly what their quarantine protocols are off the top of my head, but I would assume it's pretty standard around major sports leagues that if you've been in contact with somebody, you have to sit down for 14 days, no contact. So,
and you know, with baseball, that could be like 6, 7 games, 8 games.
Exactly. So this is no laughing matter, really. You know, like for 14 days, that's basically two series almost, a little bit over. That could happen, and maybe they have contingency plans to move series back and find a way to make up for lost time, but that's not a good sign for the NFL because the MLB is not doing a bubble system either, and the NFL is also having fans. The MLB is not doing fans, and this is still becoming an issue. So what do you think the NFL can do to not be in a similar situation in a few months' time?
Well, I mean, They just got to do what they have to do. They got to put the protocols in place. They have to. Really, the biggest thing is the same thing about NBA, and we kind of seen it with the Lou Williams situation in basketball, where he left the bubble for emergency, but decided to go to a gentleman's club, Magic City, and get some wings, which obviously can be considered irresponsible because he put himself at risk doing that. It's just, you have to, in NFL's case, you have to just trust the players and hope. Like, listen, y'all want to play, right? So don't do anything that's going to potentially put you at risk and put your teammates at risk, put your coaches at risk, put other teams at risk because you maybe want to do something which would put you around multiple people, and now one of them could have COVID, and then now you're spreading it to other people, and now it's just a big catastrophe, and it's just like, what is going on here? Why are we doing this? Because the last thing, because listen, obviously the biggest fear is that the NFL season might have to be canceled right in the middle of it, and it's not like basketball where maybe you can make it up later. Like, literally, they canceled the season, and we ain't playing another snap to the next season. You know, that's just, I mean, they could maybe, but it wouldn't work with the calendar and everything. It just wouldn't work. So it's going to be a situation where I'm sure coaches will have meetings with players and say, hey, listen, you want us to be able to do what we want to do this year and play and see this season through. Y'all all have to take personal responsibility for your personal actions. Do anything you potentially can to make everybody safe. And then if everybody can do that, I think we can get through this season no problem and be able to still play the game that we all love and not have to tell people, yeah, we're just going to have to just end it right here. We're going to have to stop playing. Because like I said, that would only happen if there's a outbreak in the NFL. And, obviously I feel like players potentially also in potential hotspot states that are more dangerous than others are more likely maybe to even opt out for more players. I don't know how bad Missouri's numbers were, but it was interesting that, like I said, the guard opted out. I know Baltimore's numbers aren't the worst, but like so far we haven't gotten any players from a hotspot place. You would feel like they would be more like, oh man, like the Florida team, since they have 3, you would think they would be like, man, if we play, we really taking a chance here. Like literally, we can step outside the facility, man, with the numbers here, and we don't know who got it. So it'll be interesting to kind of see, how it all kind of plays out when it gets closer to the season. And I don't think we have an actual date yet for when players have an official opt-out date. So, like I said, I think it'll probably be for the next month. You'll start seeing people kind of choosing to opt out and leave. And we'll see who also decides to stay as well.
Right. So we're going to take another break, and coming out, we're going to be talking about some feuds, some verbal and Twitter finger exchanges via social media between a couple wide receivers, all about rankings and who is better. Who do you feel is better? That's coming up, GSMC football.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, GSMC Nation, we're back here talking football and talking beef over Twitter. Brice, we got some Twitter beef today, man. Go ahead and let the people know who's beefing. Where's the chicken at? We getting some stew? What kind of beef we working with here, man?
Listen, you obviously know every year now, the NFL does their NFL's top 100 players, which is voted on by the players. So obviously, this is a yearly list, so it could change every year. But I'm guessing what happened was Keenan Allen, wide receiver from the LA Chargers, I believe he was on the list, and he made some tweets, a series of tweets, because other receivers were ranked ahead of him. And a couple of the receivers were, I believe, Tyreek, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin. So obviously, this kind of got Twitter on fire because they were just like, Keenan, what do you mean? Keenan, what have you done? I mean, nobody's saying you're bad, but I mean, listen, I would think a lot of people would think out of the four of those receivers, Keenan Allen is number 4 on that list. Is that kind of far-fetched to say, Ethan?
From a production standpoint, we got to remind ourselves, Chris Godwin just bust on the scene. We got to see it for another year. Personally, we've seen what Keenan Allen is capable of for the past 3 years while he's been healthy. He hasn't missed a game since his last injury in 3 years. Keenan Allen is a stud. Like, no question. His route running is fantastic. Let's not pretend that he did what he did with a Phillip Rivers that was basically throwing games. Now, granted, Jameis was also throwing a lot of games too in his own right. But I think peak good Jameis was better than whatever Phillip Rivers was on a good day last year. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that I think that Keenan Allen is top 5. What I'm saying is he has the right to feel like he's better than those players. And if that gives him motivation, so be it. I think that having a little bit of an edge to himself for this season is a good thing for him. And if this is what needed to happen, it's cool. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm thinking Keenan Allen is better than Mike Williams, but I'm also not going to sit here and say that they play even exactly the same. Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are 2 different types of receivers. Like, Mike Evans is like 6'4". All he has to do is jump and catch the ball. He just runs down, positions himself in the post move, and jumps and catches the pass. That's it. Now, I've seen Mike Evans get shut down. Shout out to Marcus Lattimore. Plenty of times. I've seen Keenan Allen have some bad games in his time. But Keenan Allen is a route runner supreme. He's somebody who has good footwork, just shakes people out their books. He's like a Stephon Diggs in his own right. But there's a level and there is a threshold that Mike Evans can reach that we just don't get to see from Keenan Allen just because he doesn't have the pure physicals that Mike Evans has. And it's the same thing with Julio. It's the same thing with Michael Thomas. It's really the same thing with Tyreek Hill, because I would put Tyreek Hill basically in the top 5 just based off of his speed and what he does for another person's offense, or should I say what he does to the opposite team's defense. Tyreek Hill is the best weapon in football, not at the quarterback position, and it's not even close. What you see him able to create by himself, people have to account for him so hard. It's like, we know Julio has to be accounted for. It doesn't matter. Julio's going to get it. We know what Michael Thomas is going to do. You can't stop what Michael Thomas is going to do, though. We know what Tyreek Hill can do to you, so you have to be accounted for. And, of course, Keenan Allen is the best weapon besides Austin Eckler on the Chargers, but I'm not seeing Keenan Allen catching the attention of a Julio, a DeAndre, a Michael Thomas, a Tyreek. I don't see that. Now, Mike Evans, he was getting a lot of attention and still putting up numbers with trash quarterbacks, but at the same time, now he has Chris Godwin. There's a lot of firepower on this offense to spread the ball out. They're kind of like the Chiefs. So, I mean, what can you do? Maybe Chris Godwin and Mike Evans don't have to work as hard anymore to get stats, but that's really never been a indicator of who's more skilled or who's more talented or who has a better team around them. You know, it's kind of like apples and oranges. They're different players, and I feel like Keenan Allen is definitely top 10, but I don't know if he's better than all three of those other guys that were listed on that sheet or on his tweet, should I say.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, I like I said, Keenan Allen is definitely a great talent for what he is, and I think also Keenan Allen's I believe he's 5'10" as well. I'm not 100% sure, but he's also not the tallest receiver in the world either, and he's making plays with what he's been doing with his route running and etc. And obviously, Mike Evans responded, and he said, "You tied the wrong Chris Godwin, and don't be mad at us. We ain't making the rankings or care about him. I like the confidence, but be realistic. You're not on my level, bro." So obviously, Mr. Evans said, "Listen, I get that you need a chip on your shoulder. You need yourself motivation. You need yourself, all the, things that can maybe motivate a player. But listen, we are in two different stratospheres as wide receivers. I can be considered almost as elite as a Julio, Michael Thomas. You could be a top tier, number 2 to like a low tier number 1. I mean, it just depends." So, obviously it was interesting hearing that from him. And then obviously Keenan Allen came out after that and said, he didn't respond, but he basically just said, "I'm the best receiver in the AFC West without any question." So then obviously it made you start thinking, okay, so who's in the AFC West? Let's see, Denver. Who's the best receiver, you would say? Cortland Sutton? Okay, we can give you that. And then you go to, let's say the Chargers. We got, I believe, Oakland. Who's Oakland's best receiver?
They probably just drafted him, so.
Yeah, probably. So, I mean, you can say, okay, out of the two teams, okay, yeah, we can give it to you. But then you get to Kansas City, and then it's just like, all right, so I think we're both taking Tyreek Hill over Keenan.
I just think that you can say, I think Tyreek Hill is an underrated player because a lot of people just think that it's his speed that gets him to where he is. And of course he plays with the best quarterback in the NFL. So that helps too. But I also think that he's an underrated route runner, and that coupled with his speed makes him extremely dangerous. Now, maybe Keenan Allen isn't blessed with Tyreek Hill's speed. Maybe he feels like he had to work harder, and he still makes it happen for him without having the godlike speed that Tyreek Hill was blessed with. But, it's at the end of the day, if he feels that way, he feels that way. It's kind of like if Mike Evans feels that way, he feels that way. I don't think anybody has to be wrong or right here. And until they can prove it on the field against one another, it doesn't really matter anyway. And it's not like it will if they did play against each other. They're not defending one another. But if he does have a really big day against Tampa Bay, people are going to look at that and be like, Mike, where was you at? You didn't talk to your DBs, right? And
yeah,
the Chargers just got, who do they get from the Broncos? If I remember correctly, they got their defensive back.
Chris Harris Jr.?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, they definitely did.
Chris Harris Jr.
Yeah, they got Chris Harris Jr., so he's got to cover one of them. And we already know Mike Evans struggles in zone coverage. That's not really his forte of beating. But in man-to-man, he's basically unguardable. But it could have came from Julio. Like, if Julio would have said what Mike Evans would have said, I don't even think people would be discussing this. Because Papa Julio, when he speaks up, we listen, okay? Julio has been the best wide receiver pound for pound since Calvin Johnson decided to put up the cleats. That was it. At that point, Julio usurped, and everybody else had to stand in line. I know what AB did. I know what his stats say. But I know what I see every 2 weeks of the year against the Falcons. Julio is the best wide receiver that has graced that field besides Calvin Johnson in the last 10 years. And I'm a Michael Thomas supporter, diehard. I will put my feet in the sand and turn it on that. I am staying put.
Well, you can't forget about that little beef. We talk about Keenan Allen, Mike Evans. We gotta look at the Devontae Parker and Michael Thomas beef too now. I mean, listen, you did call out Devontae, so hey, Devontae has a big year because I don't think y'all played Miami this year, but if he has a big year, Devontae might come back and say something later. So,
I mean, good for him, but he's not Michael Thomas. Like, you got to remember, people have big years all the time. We don't talk about Devontae Adams enough, right? Not Devontae Parker, but Devontae Adams for Green Bay. And he has been consistently the best offensive weapon Aaron Rodgers has had for years. And he's one of the more underrated offensive weapons in the NFC constantly. But he's not better than Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, Tyreek Evans, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. He's not better. He's just not. It's not doing it.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair.
And that's just the bottom line. Devontae Parker had one quality season, and that's because Preston Williams, who was having a much better start to his season before the injury, and then Devontae Parker just kind of exploded on the scene. Now, I'm not saying that he can't continue to be better, but we have no track record to see that, oh yeah, Devontae Parker is definitely going to be the guy now. We have no track record of that. Just like we don't have any track record for a lot of things. Like for Chris Godwin. It was an amazing season for Chris Godwin, but it was 1 year. I'd like to see it for another before I just ordain Chris Godwin in the upper half of the top 10. He probably is still top 10, but I'd say he's 9 or 10. I don't think he's better than Keenan Allen, who's constantly had to do work to get to where he is. And it's not like other people in the receiving core of the Chargers were doing a whole lot of work outside of Keenan Allen. Like Terrell Williams, he's okay. We know that. We know Melvin Gordon was doing some things in the passing game too, but then Austin Eckler came on the scene. And from then on, it was Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, and we know that Hunter Henry is a really, really good talent, but Hunter Henry can't find himself to stay on the field for the better half of his career this part anyway. So what can you do besides throw to Keenan Allen? And I'm sure most defenses recognize that Keenan Allen is their sole number one option on the offense besides Austin Eckler. So you got to pick and choose. They're kind of similar to New Orleans in a large part when they did have Phillip Rivers, where it was two main guys and they had a tight end every now and again that would do some cool stuff. So what can you say? I don't think that Keenan Allen is not justified in believing what he does or what he believes in. And I don't feel like Mike Evans should feel like he has to be like, oh yeah, he's right. Like he doesn't have to say, yeah, you're right. Or he doesn't have to be humble either. Humility is overrated in sports. Everybody's looking for the edge and everybody wants to continue to be the top dog in their respective sports. LeBron's not saying Zion's up next. LeBron might say Zion's up next, right? But he's not going to say, yeah, Zion's better than me. Never come out of LeBron's mouth. Why should it come out of Mike Evans? Why should it come out of Keenan Allen? Why should it come out of Michael Thomas? Why should it come out of Julio's? Nobody's going to say somebody's better than me. It's just not to be. You don't back down from that. You prove it on the field. And for the better part of this half decade, everybody who speaks up has proved it on the field to their own respect. It's just some people are objectively better, but it's not their job to look at the objective. Their job is to perform on the field. We can look at it objectively and be like, yeah, Julio's the best wide receiver out of this whole bunch. But Michael Thomas and Tyreek don't have to look at that, or whoever. That's just how it is.
Yeah, because they're in their own respective and own right. You can make an argument how they could be the best. So that's why it's just a very fluid argument, and you can say any of them were really the best, you know?
Right. But we're going to take our final break here, and then we're going to come back and finish out the podcast here on the GSMC Football Podcast. We'll be right back.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, Brice. So to finish up the podcast, we got to talk about the fans and what the fans mean to the NFL. Clearly they mean a lot, because I believe that they are going to be the first sports league in the U.S. to allow fans but it's from each owner's discretion. So not all teams are going to follow or allow fans into their stadiums. Not all states are going to allow fans into their stadiums, but they have the option too. So I think the Jets have already announced that they are going to be playing without fans. So there's a lot to say about that, isn't there? I feel like maybe this means some teams will have a certain home field advantage than others because they will allow fans and other teams won't in their home field, or maybe they'll figure something out. I know, here we go. Here's the third Falcons one. You know where I'm going with this. Maybe the Falcons were ahead of the game when it came to pumping in crowd noise while they were playing against other teams.
Literally, man, what's going to happen is they'll be like, all right, now we need you to pump in crowd noise.
Ahead of the game, man. The Falcons have done it again. Found a way to get ahead of the game. They just did it. They done it again. But on a serious note, what does this mean for the NFL? Do you really think that this is going to stick? Because we're already seeing it's tough enough dealing with the players individually being kept accountable to do what they need to do, right? And I don't know how the NFL is going to allow fans in. They say socially distanced, but there's still a lot of checks and balances with that. Then they got to serve food. I would still assume they'd serve food. If they're bringing in fans, they're going to be serving the beer. They're going to be serving the food at the concessions. I just don't know how you physically enforce it. Grocery stores are enforcing wearing masks, and I'm sure the NFL is going to say if you don't have a mask, you can't come in. But that's only one, that's only one part of it. Just because you're having a mask on doesn't mean that somebody can't, brush against you or something like that. And, germs spread in different ways besides just, face and nose, right? All it takes is a few different places of contact. You can just touch the side of your face and you're in your wraps. You're done. So what can this be from outside of the COVID possibilities? Of course, we understand the risk as far as COVID and what this could mean. But as far as NFL teams, how do you think this affects other teams that choose to not play with fans rather than to allow a certain number of fans in?
I always thought it would be interesting to see that, because we're gonna have basically games where you have fans and no fans. Here's the thing we gotta look at. When it comes to fans, remember the XFL for that short period of time we had it. Remember, their fan base was like between 10,000 and 20,000 for the most part. Now, obviously, there was no social distancing, so everybody was up. But they weren't selling out NFL state arenas and stadiums. So now they need that exact. So, and if you remember those games, the fans still were able to be somewhat of a factor. You could still hear them. They were still help the game presentation. So in terms of keeping that amount of fans, it can work. It's just obviously it'll be from a social distancing perspective. But then you got to think about the teams who are saying, okay, we're not going to have fans. And then you're going, those are the games that are going to be interesting to watch because you don't maybe have the crowd aesthetic. Would they do crowd noise? What we going to see, man? We going to see some Madden crowd noise pumped in there? It depends, because like I said, one of the biggest things about games is presentation on TV. It can be maybe a little dull if you're just watching football with no type of noise, except maybe an occasional player talking, maybe people from the sideline talking. But outside of that, just playing football and that's it. So it'll be interesting, just to see that. Because like I said, so far from the NFC South, we're the only one that said, the Falcons have said, they're the only ones that said they're going to try to have fans, even though they're saying if you have fans, they have to wear masks. We'll see if the Saints allow people into their dome. We'll see if the Panthers allow people. We'll see if Tampa Bay allows people, But it's definitely something that will probably continue to linger on a little bit, I think. It's something that's going to just be there for the most, to me, it's just going to be there for the most part, because we really don't know how it all will look and how it all will turn out. There's not a definitive view that we can maybe say is going to happen or be there.
Yeah.
And,
I feel you on that.
Yeah, we'll have to just kind of see, I guess, what every team comes up with. Like I said, the only two teams I know actively who have a plan is the Falcons and Miami. Because Miami talked about this plan months ago. So they were already ahead of the curve in terms of announcing it. So it'll be, and I think, I want to say, I don't know if it was Pittsburgh or Baltimore. I know they had mentioned they were going to cut 50% of their season tickets. So maybe they're probably going to do a very limited basis as well. So I'm sure, again, over this next month before we get to the regular season, you'll start to hear more individual team plans for fans. Because I think a lot of teams want to wait till they see how bad it is in their respective areas and states before they go ahead and say, okay, this is the plan. But I'm sure they're working on a plan if they do have them and if they don't have them.
Yeah. And I think the big thing is, for me, I just feel like if you are in a hot zone, the NFL should have looked at this and said, if you are in a hot zone, you can't have fans until the area clears out. Because it doesn't mean that you can't have fans indefinitely, right? But until your area numbers go down respectively to a place to where it may be possible to allow fans, you shouldn't be able to have them, because your city or your state didn't do what it needed to do. And that's not fair to potentially endanger your players, your league, other people, involved outside of in your own communities, or go outside and possibly spread the virus even more in one isolated location. And because you decided not to do what you needed to do, and you just want to make some revenue, even though your area is not in a space to where that's really ethically smart, in my opinion. So places like Tampa, Jacksonville, Miami, Atlanta, New Orleans has had their issues. Of course, I don't really know how the Carolinas are doing with COVID-19, but generally, a lot of these places in the Southeast and some places in Texas or the Central South have had issues with COVID-19 spreading at some alarming rates. And the numbers just keep rising, and as more tests comes in, and then we got people fighting for no mask of all things. So we got a lot of things to get ahead of before we can even really look at this as objectively a good thing or not. Because what's wrong with taking just a monetary loss for 1 year just to ensure the safety and the integrity of the league at a certain point? Like, why is it that we have to always find a way to make money out of every single possible situation? Sometimes you just have to chalk up the L. Don't we know this already? Like, us normal people, right? You and me, Brice, I would say we're normal guys. We got to take our L's on the chin, no matter what the situation is. Sometimes we try to salvage it and that doesn't work. This is just one of those situations where I think the NFL just has to take the lump on the chin. Got to take their lumps and try to come out of this next year with a better scenario and a better plan, maybe in order to have fans, but to say leave fans up to the states is kind of lame to me, a little bit cowardly, I'd have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. You know, you're asking about the money thing. It's just like, listen, these owners, the league, and to the players to a certain extent, you know, they all care about that money. You know, they all now. Obviously, we can sit here and say, well, the owners are more in a better position than the players because they already have more money than players anyway. So they could because if they took no fans, it's really more affecting them in terms of a revenue loss than a actual football player. Because really, as far as we know, all the football players are going to get their salaries, I believe. I know that the owner's talking about producing it, but as far as we know, the players are going to get their money. So if they have no fans, it's not necessarily going to hurt the players in their paycheck. The owners are the ones losing money. And, you know, it's actually very interesting. I know this is a different sport, but an NBA owner came out today and said if they played with no fans during, I believe, the next season, he said he could lose up to $50 million. And that's probably how NFL owners think. Like, hey, if we don't have fans for 8 games, I could lose millions. And so that's why they feel like we have to at least try to salvage some part of that money. Because either way, I think it's been accepted. We're losing money. There's no way we're going to keep or get our revenue where it would be on a normal season. I think it's all about damage control, trying to limit the damage as much as possible, which is the reason why the NFLPA came to that deal with the NFL, saying, listen, we're not going to do this 2-year reducage of salary for like $40 million. And now we got free agency coming up. Nobody can get paid because the salary cap went way down. People are getting cut just because y'all want a short-term, you know, fix. We need to be able to allow this to, over the CBA deal, if any types of money is lost, we let it come out of every year, but still not be enough to actually hurt the players and their money. And then we go from there, you know? So it's just something, you know, it's not the best, but this is the reason why every sports league has came back. Because they're trying to, every sports league probably feels like we at least want to try. We to do something, even though some easily more accepted no fans, where the NFL is, I mean, literally, if you think about it, the NFL is the only group, and even college football potentially, is the only group of a sport that's still actively trying to figure out how can we incorporate fans into the season, while every other sport has basically said, okay, no fans, and we're leaving it at that.
There's just no way that college football can have fans after they're saying no non-conference games in certain parts of the country. There's just no way. Right? It's just too divided. Like, each conference is basically like their own league in a sense. So if there's no NCAA uniformity on something like that, I just think that they can't really do fans. Like, it's just too much. They're already having enough time trying to get games scheduled, let alone have fans. The NFL, they're locked in, their own private organization, own private company. They can set the rules for their league as much as possible. And it affects all 32. And unfortunately, the difference between the Pac-12 and the SEC is they got different people running different businesses. But I do agree that they are trying to figure out a way to stop the bleeding. And I think there is a fine line between trying to stop the bleeding and trying to have the best interest in heart for the health of your league long term and the health of your players, because I think a lot of billionaires, a lot of millionaires, a lot of people who are wealthy and have earned wealth over the years are naturally very concerned on keeping their wealth as much as possible and making a profit or return on investment. They don't like to lose money. And that's natural. No one likes to lose money, but we are not in a natural situation here, at least not natural in the economic sense. We don't feel like this is something that we ever had to go through before. And people are putting it akin to the Great Depression and recession of '08. And, these things aren't this isn't even naturally occurring. This is a pandemic. It's a disease that we are trying to actively try and come ahead of and stay afloat, stay above water. And putting fans in stands just in different parts of regions, and even those regions are hot spots, we're already seeing some backlash potentially that because the Marlins were in Atlanta, it's very possible that they contracted COVID-19 out there, but it's not like they aren't in their own hot spot in Florida. It's a bad vibe, man. I don't know what the correct answer is, but I feel like the NFL should have thought, at least in my opinion, to think about the hot spots and dealing with that a bit differently. But Brice, do you have anything last thing you want to say before we wrap up the podcast?
I mean, not really. We're still in that. What I've said multiple times. We are just still in a. We just gonna have to see. We just gonna have to see what happens, man. We got to see if it's gonna get really bad. Are they gonna be able to actually do damage control? What it's all gonna turn into, man? They call it the most unique football season ever. And I mean, yeah, you can say that for every sport. It's going to be the most unique season ever because we've never, as far as we know, ever had to deal with a pandemic during a sports season that caused it to make these types of changes. So we just going to have to, see everything that happens. And as we are continuously, week by week when we do these shows, getting closer to the season supposedly starting, and we'll see what new information and new info will be out by our next podcast together.
Yeah, man. But with that said, this is going to be the end of the GSMC football podcast for this day, evening, morning, night, whenever you choose to listen to us. But thank you for coming. Thank you for clicking on the links. Thanks for sharing. And if you are sharing, please share us a comment. Tell us how you feel about the podcast. Write a review. Give us a rating. It helps a lot. And don't forget to follow us on social media, our Facebook and our Twitter at GSMC Football. For Brice, this is Ethan signing out, and we'll see you all next week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.